Welcome back, Tiger Timers. Today we've got a list of the most iconic, memorable scenes in games that I've played. Obviously I can't put in games that I haven't played, but I just wanted to make a list of games that I've played, and I'm sure that they'll coincide with some of yours. In my last video about the saddest moments, someone commented and left me their own personal list, which was really cool to read, and none of those are on my list, so I think it's cool to disagree and to have different opinions, and so I'm sure that there's going to be some of that with this video, and I'm looking forward to seeing what everyone has to say and think about it. So I've been on a little list making streak, so here's another one for you. And we're going to start this one with our first game, first iconic scene. I remember this haunted me as a kid. This is going to be from the game Resident Evil 1. I remember as a kid playing Resident Evil 2 and thinking that it was one of the hardest games I'd ever played and the scariest. And I'm talking about the original Resident Evil 2 on the PlayStation, if I remember right. Yeah, yep, so I just checked and it was for the original PlayStation. I thought I remembered popping open that little guy and throwing a disc in there, but like I said, I just looked it up and it's kind of a shame because when I look up Resident Evil 2 now, it just brings up the remake, which I love. Is actually one of my favorite games of the year it came out. I had it in my personal game of the year, which felt weird for a remake, but it was just so good. It reinvented sort of the idea of remakes in the horror genre and set a new standard in my opinion. I love that game, but it is a shame that that original was kind of lost to time. And even the remake didn't quite bring back that same, I don't know, it did a lot of good things and it did tell a similar story, but there's something about that top-down Silent Hill, older Resident Evil style camera angle that just added to the horror and the difficulty. All that to say, I do think that the remake is terrifying also, and the first time you see Mr. X in that game is also an iconic moment. But anyways, back to Resident Evil 1. That has the scene. If you know the game, if you've played it before, even just for an hour or less, then you know the scene I'm talking about. It is the so-called turning around zombie scene, or the first zombie. Some people even call him Taz, as a sort of a lovable nickname, an acronym for turning around zombie. So the game starts out, it has that crazy cutscene where you're sort of being attacked by dogs, and then your crew, your STARS crew, is on a mission to save other members of the STARS crew that had gone missing. And you barely escape these dogs, and you head into the original Resident Evil 1 mansion. And it's pretty spooky from the start. You're just sort of in this foyer, the entrance area, and you just start walking around. You're looking for this guy named Kenneth Sullivan, one of your fellow squad mates. And it's during the search that you find the turning around zombie, the first one. Anyways, it was terrifying. It was like a literal cutscene of this thing turning around, and you see this side profile of it. If you've ever played the game, you know the one. It made me want to quit right there and then. But this is sort of when you realize, oh man, stuff's going down. And it's just terrifying. It made me stop playing horror games for a while. Like I said, I was a little kid when I played, so I just had to put that in there because that's such a cool moment. I was also really tempted to go all the way back to Resident Evil 2, which I brought up in the first place for a reason, was to talk about the Resident Evil 2 scene, which is right in the beginning as well, where it's not really the same, it's not cinematic, but when you as Leon go into the gun store and talk to the gun owner, and he gets wrecked by a zombie, and it is terrifying, because from there you have to get past the zombie and go down into alleyways, and it's just that camera style where you're just looking down at Leon, you can hear zombies all around you, but you can't see anything. Anyways, love that series, one of my favorites, and I just had to put that in here. If you've played it, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about as well. So this is a weird video because in my last video about the saddest moments in gaming, I don't have a ton of conventional games on there. I do have some, and people probably know of all of them, but I don't think that that list would necessarily match a lot of people, or maybe even the majority of people's lists. But for this one, since they're iconic moments, I kind of had to follow the zeitgeist, which was fun, and it's cool to look back on these because of the impact they had. And like I said, what I'm really curious about is to see if people disagree. Maybe they think they aren't as iconic, but the reason why I'm choosing most of these, I'll hopefully have a few curveballs, I'm planning to, but why I chose these as iconic is because of how much they meant to me and to gaming in general. So the next one up on this list is Final Fantasy VII. Again, just like Resident Evil, if you've played this, you know what I'm about to say. And spoilers with this one for sure, big ones. But again, we're going back to the PlayStation. What a console, like I said in my PlayStation ranking list. This is about Aerith's death. Aerith, at the time of her death, is a central character. She's someone you play as. She's a party member. It was very rare. I'm sure that it happened before this. I can't remember. I can't recall the JRPGs that came out before this where your party member died as a part of the story and they couldn't be revived. That's just it. They're gone. I'm sure that it happened in a JRPG I haven't played that came out before 1997, but this was a crazy thing to experience as a kid. And it's one of the most notable, one of the most important scenes in the Final Fantasy series. And it's the one that people think of when they think of Final Fantasy VII if they've played it through. And it's just so good, it's so powerful. It gives Cloud a new motivation at the end of the first part of the game. It makes you hate Sephiroth even more, and makes you terrified of him because holy cow, he just savagely murdered this innocent, sweet girl. There's not a whole lot to say about this one besides it's just so freaking iconic, and I think it's something that people, myself included, were really looking forward to seeing what they did with in Rebirth. And anyways, Final Fantasy VII, awesome game. Again, we're going back to the PlayStation. Again, a game that's been remade. So, yeah, anyways, got that on the list. Alright, so I'm going to go a little unconventional here for the next game I want to talk about. But it was my first game on the PlayStation 4, and it blew my mind. And it's a little more recent. I've had the PlayStation games, PlayStation 1 games. Now I want to go to a more recent game. And this game, the scene is coming from God of War 2018. Now I love the original God of War games. This game just kind of blew my mind, and there are plenty of iconic moments. It's been a while since I've played them, so I can't recall them all, but you obviously have the fight with Zeus at the end of God of War 3. And just some epic intro fights in all of the games, but this was iconic because of how it defined a total series shift in how successfully they did it. And to me, it was courageous, and I respected the total shift in tone that they went for that was immediately evident from the start. And this intro, this scene, which is the fight with Baldur, was, to me, iconic immediately. So I was reading the actual blog post about this fight from PlayStation.com, and they made a great point, and I hadn't considered this really, but one really iconic aspect of this fight in this intro is the change in the actual camera use. And I guess I had noticed it immediately because when you're playing the original God of War games, or that random one on the PSP that I actually played a lot of, it's Chains of something. I had a lot of fun with that one when I was a kid, but it's the camera change. When you're playing those original games, it's very like Bayonetta, that same type of zoomed out camera style. And I know the God of War came before Bayonetta, but zoomed out camera style and just action, 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 just wrecking people. And the boss fights are crazy, they're epic. You're climbing on a serpent's back and sticking your chaos blades in, the blades of chaos in there, and just slashing them up. And it's a crazy zoomed out camera fighting epic experience. And immediately from the start in this game, it's extremely zoomed in, and you notice that. It's almost as if it isn't God of War. And what we get introduced to is this boss fight where, holy cow, boss fights now with this new, older, more thoughtful Kratos we're going to be zoomed in. This is going to be a close fight. We're fighting someone who's the same size as Kratos, which he almost never did in the original games. And that tonal shift was just so whole and so well done that it was iconic to me. It's just the way they did it all. I don't know if it was all intentional, but there's something also poetic about bringing the camera in, focusing more. It's as if it's sort of reflecting Kratos' mindset shift, where it used to be zoomed out and it was just larger picture, just chaos, just not really focusing and thinking about the little things. And then in this game, we have that camera reflecting him actually focusing on the little things, taking in the little moments with Atreus, slowing down. Again, I don't know if they meant to do that. Even if they didn't, it's still poetic. Maybe I'm making up some BS like it's English class, but I really like that, how that's reflecting Kratos' change. And I'm talking about this one longer because I feel like this one's going to be a little more controversial than those other ones. But I also, my last reason, I think it's iconic because it sort of, to me, again, like Resident Evil 2 Remake did for Resident Evil and the horror remake sort of standard, it set, if not set a new standard, it set a new framework, a new layout for people to remake an entire series or revitalize or refresh. I know that not everyone loves the new Kratos, but the fact that they managed to make it almost an entirely different game with a main character who's not even the same type of person, and do that successfully, was made possible because they changed everything else. The camera angle, the fighting style. And to me, this scene set the tone for that and sort of captures all of those little changes they made into this one scene, into this one starting fight. Alright, next game. One of my favorites. I love the freaking N64. It's sort of where I got started. I had the old Pokemon N64 where you push the Pokeball up, it turns it on, and then you push Pikachu's foot to reset it. It was just cool, man. It was yellow and blue. And one of the games I played the most on it was The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. And that's going to have the next, it's sort of a hybrid two-scene thing. Primarily the beginning of the game, but that's my next iconic game, iconic scene in the list. So Majora's Mask. I don't know if this one is going to be agreed upon. When I think about people talking about it, I don't think that they call this iconic. I mean, the art style, sort of, the weirdness that it represents in the Zelda series is pretty iconic. But so the actual scene I'm talking about, the two scenes are the first time you see the Skull Kid wearing Majora's Mask, because that image just burns into my mind. And it's terrifying, and it's something that I can, more than most other images in games, immediately recall. As well as the music, I can just hear it all, and for a scene to be iconic, I need to remember every aspect of it. And it sort of felt like I was Link in that moment. And the other scene is the first time you see the moon / the moon crashing down. This has multiple scenes, but again, the moon is just burned into your skull. And it's something that as you play the game, even as I'm in the dungeons, I'm thinking about it as it's heading towards Termina. It's just something that is iconic because of how it burned into my head. And all of these scenes, that's sort of the criteria for me. The one exception, God of War, it didn't necessarily burn into my head. It was more the effect it had of just the first time Baldur threw that punch. Just that potency of that. But in Majora's Mask, the image of the moon smiling coming down and the actual mask of Majora taking over the Skull Kid, you realize, holy cow, this is not the Zelda I knew. This is the Ocarina of Time had obviously creepy moments, and Under the Well, for instance, that's terrifying. But Majora's Mask was saying, hey, you're in Majora's world now, and the moon is coming for you. To me, that was iconic. To me, that's something that changed how I thought about games as a kid. Alright, so this one has got to go to... I love my old consoles. This one's got to go to Super Mario 64. So Super Mario 64, in itself, when I was thinking about it, it's such an iconic game. I was trying to think about whether it had a truly iconic scene, and you know, it certainly has some iconic moments, but for me, the iconic scene is that first time you're allowed to control Mario. As the camera pans down, Lakitu sort of explaining how the camera works, because this is the first 3D platformer. That's iconic. It's mind-blowing. I think I played Banjo-Kazooie and Ocarina of Time before it, but in terms of how iconic that game was, and even for me playing Mario 64, it was still iconic, and I could tell how special it was. And that's just a game that I put on here out of respect, because it was the standard bearer for platformers, 3D platformers, and a game that I love so much, Banjo-Kazooie, was born from that. And just that first scene where you are Mario, you are staring at the castle. That's it. That's the scene. Keeping this one simple, but that's iconic. Legendary. Alright, let's get to some honorable mentions here. I like to have these on my list. I like to keep it to 5. It feels like a good number for the actual video, but honorable mentions, gonna go with Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, Ghost's death. That's also in my saddest moments as an honorable mention. It's just a tough one when you're looking up, and then as you're betrayed, when you're looking up at Commander Shepard and that fire lights and you see Ghost there, it's brutal. It was hardcore, and there was nothing really like that in the first COD campaign, so I put that on here. Also got Skyrim. For me, that game's iconic in so many ways, but the first time you see the dragon, when you're hearing it, you're panicking, looking around, at least I was, and first time you see the dragon when the executioner's about to smack your head off and the dragon appears, you know you're in for a heck of an adventure. And to me, that was iconic. I remember how freaking hyped I was when I saw that dragon. Obviously, I knew the dragons were a center of the game. I was all in on the advertising campaign and the hype train for that game, so I knew what I was going to get into. But the first time that dragon showed up, badass black storms, fireballs coming from the sky, to me that's iconic. That is, holy cow, we're in for an adventure. Another one, another Bethesda game, Fallout New Vegas. It's a heck of a long cutscene. I watched it through again just to see if it was as iconic as I remember, and it is. And it's primarily that whole opening cutscene, but specifically the ending. I think that anyone who's played that game and watched through that remembers the ending of the cutscene where you're shot, you're buried, you're told, damn, you just kind of hit some bad luck here, kid. Made the wrong delivery, and now we're gonna have to pop you. So that's iconic to me because immediately you have a mystery. Because right after you're shot, there you are looking up at the dock. And again, just like the dragon, it sets the precedent for the adventure that's to come. In the back of my mind, I knew I'm gonna find that guy somehow. I'm gonna figure out who shot me, who buried me, and I'm trying to get my memory back as well. And it was just an awesome start to that game. Iconic. I love the first Metal Gear Solid. So many awesome characters. And I wanted to put this one in here because of the fight with Psycho Mantis. There's sort of a lead up to this fight. Everyone in Foxhound is so cool and all the boss fights are so interesting, but really he only has this one encounter, but it's this whole crazy scene where you're tripping out, and if you played the original game, you have to actually use a second controller to do something, and it is just a crazy trippy game that makes you question reality and whether Mantis is hacking your actual console. And he's just such a cool, interesting character, and this one, just along with a few others, could easily make it on this list, but to me that was super iconic. I also thought that the Halo Reach ending was iconic as heck, where you're watching, what's his name? I also want to put the Halo Reach ending in here where you're fighting off waves of enemies and you watch one of your squad mates take an energy sword through the gut, rip it out, stab an enemy, another one comes at them, they all go over the cliff, and even after all that, he still says something to you. Just one of the most badass deaths of all time. Had to put that in here too, iconic. Just a few other rapid fires. Breath of the Wild, that first scene when you walk out onto the Great Plateau. I've talked about that one a few times now, and that's a great one. As well as, I think, Subnautica with the first Leviathan sighting. That is terrifying, and it's iconic, and everyone remembers what that felt like and the exact feeling of terror that they felt when they saw the first Leviathan.